next speaker is Mr. Andrew Cole. Mr. Andrew Cole is going to be talking about owning Outlook using PowerShell, and he works for a company named Chiron. Let me tell you a little bit about Chiron. If you're unfamiliar with Chiron, they are here in Augusta today. They're an information security training company. They do a lot of good training, and they have awesome capture flags upstairs. You can see a couple of laptops here. If you got a laptop here and you're not going to plug it into that upstairs, you're going to miss out. They got a lot of really great challenges. And Chiron's been very responsive to this event, and we are very fortunate to have them here in Augusta, and also to have Mr. Andrew Cole. I see this guy present at conferences before, and I can tell you that each year this has been one of my favorite talks. Has come from him and his group at each of these conferences. So if you would, please join me in welcoming Mr. Andrew Cole.
Thank you. Mark's so nice. All right. This is owning Microsoft Outlook with Windows PowerShell. The quick, obligatory Git host. So my name is Andrew Cole. Everybody just calls me Cole, always have. Oh, damn. Graber's trolling me already. Okay. If you want to find me on Twitter, if you have any questions afterward, you can hit me up at Culmination. So a little bit about me and what I do. I'm currently a content developer and an instructor for Chiron's information operations team. I teach a number of classes on computer network exploitation, using conventional tools and PowerShell, as well as some MPS and defense classes. In my spare time, I do a little dabbling in security research, and I mostly just love playing around with PowerShell. It's fun and exciting. In a prior life, I was a journeyman interactive operator for the U.S. Army out of Fort Meade. Did that for about 4 years or so, and spoken at a couple of cons here, NOLACon, so on and so forth. That's about all that's interesting about me. All right, first my obligatory thanks. I would like to thank BSides for giving me this awesome place to talk at. This is one of the best venues to do a talk at. It's just perfect layout. And of course my employer for paying me to write this. I also need to give some credits to some people whose work sort of inspired me to make this talk. So Ed Wilson, that's a Microsoft scripting guy. He does a lot of stuff, and sometimes he says things that I'm like, wow, I wonder if Microsoft knows that he's publishing that information on their website, because some of it's really, really interesting things. And Matt Nelson, he's a really smart guy. He wrote an interesting piece of code that I'll have a link to at the end of this talk that sort of led me down this general road for some of the things that we're going to be going over. And last of all the awesome people in the PowerShell community that have answered my random questions when I hit them up. Okay, so why would you want to do this? Why do you want to own PowerShell, or why do you want to own Outlook, and why do you want to use PowerShell? The big thing is, why wouldn't you want to? No matter what sort of network you're doing some red teaming or penetration testing in, odds are good for their, am I messing up your video by walking back and forth? Okay. Odds are good they use Outlook for their email. You know, every government agency uses it. Most civilian sectors use it. It integrates so well with Microsoft's other stuff that pretty much everyone uses it for email. PowerShell, as long as that host is Windows 7 or newer, it's going to have PowerShell version 2 on it, which is going to give you an incredible amount of functionality. If all these things are already there in the environment, why would you want to jeopardize your custom tool set? If you're doing red teaming and you've managed to develop a custom set, it's only a good custom set until it really gets caught, and then it's not very useful to you anymore. So if you have something that's already there on the operating system that you don't have to upload any external binaries for, use that first, and then use your one-off tool set for when you don't have any other options. Okay, so everything that I'm going to be doing here is based off the same general concept. We're going to be creating a custom COM object using PowerShell. For the first script, I'm going to be just adding the Microsoft interop assembly. That's basically going to serve as, in a nutshell, it serves as a bridge between .NET and COM. For everything else, we're just going to be creating that new custom object for the Outlook application. One of the cool things about PowerShell is because it is object-oriented. Whenever it grabs something, it doesn't if we create this variable here, we're not grabbing like a pointer to the object, we're grabbing the actual object itself. So we have pretty much full hold and control of Outlook. And if you think about the things that Outlook does in a network, just in its native behavior, it receives messages from outside of the network, and it's capable of relaying messages back out to that external network. So you've got a great sort of command and control system set up there by default. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is going to be a little bit of collection. We can collect pretty much anything that Outlook houses. Outlook views everything that it has as a folder. So it's not just the inbox, it's not just the junk folder. There's also the calendar, the contacts, the tasks. I know any environment that I've ever been in, for the most part, if you go to the commander or CEO's desktop, like, everything's there. But if you want to know what he's doing, everything is in his tasks folder, right? So in Outlook, he's got his whole calendar set there with everything he's doing for the next 6 months, and he's got all of his projects and what percentage he's through them all in his task folder. So it's useful stuff to collect. All right, I should be able to do this. Can everyone read that, or do I need to make it bigger? Oh, wow, it's really big up there. We're going to say it's good. All right. So whoop, that's the wrong one. There we go. All right, so we're going to start with this collection script. I wrote it with help menus and everything, so hopefully if June B sees this, she's proud of me. And down here, so it's a fairly simple script. It's just called get Outlook. It has a couple of parameters set up. All the parameters are basically just switches. Because it's going to pull in the same manner regardless of what folder you're going to. This is just to designate what folder you're actually going to pull the information from. By default, if you don't tell it to do anything, it goes straight to the inbox. If you want to pull from a different folder, you just need to put the appropriate switch on there to say which folder you want it to harvest information from. So this little section, pointer's hard to see. This section right here is what was on one of the earlier slides. We're just grabbing that object that is Outlook. I should note that you want to make sure Outlook is running on the host before you do this. Because if Outlook's not already running, when you create that COM object for Outlook, guess what it's going to do? It's going to start Outlook. Guess where it's going to start it? User's desktop. So it's going to make the big old pop-up that says, hey, here's Outlook. So you want to be wary of where you pop it up. Make sure they already have it open. Fortunately, when most people show up to work, what's the first thing you do? You log in, you open Outlook, you check your email, and then you minimize it and go on with your day. Nobody ever closes Outlook and then reopens it later to see if they're gotten a new email. So after that, we just have a series of switches specifying, if you want to get the calendar, you just go to the calendar, and all the different switches do is specify what folder to go to. So if you pick the calendar switch, the folder equals the namespace default folder for calendar. If you choose tasks, it switches it to tasks, and if it's contacts, it makes it contacts. That's all it needs, is to know what folder to pull from. It is then, so right here, it has, if it is the sent folder, the target folder is then Outlook folder sent mail, otherwise default to Outlook folder inbox. There's also a full switch. So what you actually see in Outlook for an email is a very small amount of the information that actually gets transmitted. Has anyone ever opened up and looked at all the metadata that goes along with an email? Like, there's a lot of stuff in there. So if you do put the full switch, it's going to grab the full content of every email. So I have a little safety catch in there that, says, hey, this might be really, really large. Are you sure this is what you want to do? And if you say yes, then it goes on and runs through, and if not, then it aborts and falls back. If you don't specify the full switch, it just goes for a default view that shows a table that has the subject line, sender, who it goes to, the date, time, and I believe the body, but the body won't contain the whole body unless you expand the property to see it. All right. So I always pray to the demo gods before I do a demo, even if it's pre-recorded. I was having a slight problem running these demos live on my laptop, because once you give 4 gigs of RAM to your Exchange server, a couple gigs to your DC, and a couple to a few workstations, there wasn't too much left for my host laptop. So it wasn't functioning well, so we just played it safe and went with pre-recorded videos. Go on over. There we go. So what I'm doing here is first I'm importing the module. So anytime you have a script in PowerShell, you have to import the module and load it up before you can execute it. Once the module is loaded up, I'm just going to type get Outlook. By default, it again pulls the inbox and puts it in a little table format so you can see if there's anything in there that is of interest. If there's not, you could move on. And at this point, I'm doing a full here. So to give you an idea how much stuff is in full, that's those same 4 emails set to full output. So it's a very large amount of information. It's all the metadata associated with the email itself. The rest of them pretty much go along in the same manner. So if you specify sent, pulls from sent. The contacts, I have it pull all the fields by default. If they're not populated, it'll just leave them blank. But they all pull, again, in the same manner because Outlook views each of them as a folder, not as separate entities. All right. So, moving on from there, looking at client side. There's a number of things that you can do with Outlook for client side, because one of the number 1 ways you client side people is you send them spear phishing emails and you get them to click on the email. One of the problems you have is sending them an email and not having Exchange or Outlook sort of snatch it up and quarantine it. So how does the email system, how does Exchange decide what emails are junk and which are just absolute outright malware? Well, there's something called your spam confidence level. So your spam confidence level, or SCL, has a rating scale of 0 to 9 plus -1. -1 is assigned to any email that comes from the trusted internal network. So if you have 2 people that are both logged into the same domain sending an email between each other, it's a -1. It automatically goes back and forth no matter what. It's considered safe and trusted, unless there are custom Outlook rules or custom Exchange rules that say otherwise. Other than that, it'll be assigned a score of 0 to 9. 0 is extremely trusted. It just says, okay, there's no way this is malware, it's just a line of text, and it will let it go through. Depending on what other attributes the email has, so if you add an attachment that has any executable functionality, that's going to make the SCL jump. If you add any links to external sites, that makes the SCL jump. So depending on how many points each one are allocated based on what's on the email, it'll raise that spam confidence level. And as it gets higher and higher, it will trip to first the junk setting, where it just goes straight to the junk folder. Not that bad. If it goes to quarantine, quarantine's an optional one. It's not there by default in Exchange, but if the person does add it, that's the worst one for us because it gets sent to the quarantine folder on the Exchange server, and only an Exchange admin has access to that folder to clean it up. So you'll have a little issue there. If it gets really bad, it'll go to reject, in which case it won't send the email and it sends a notice to the sender, or if it's, coming from a Nigerian prince who wants to transfer you money while selling you Viagra on the side, it might go ahead and bump all the way to delete and just get wiped out with no notification to anybody. So what does this have to do with Outlook? Technically nothing, but this has to do with Exchange, so I'm going to count it because the 2 work hand in hand. So there's a commandlet that's built into PowerShell, but only for PowerShell for Exchange. So you will have to actually get access to the Exchange server, or if you get administrator creds, you can PowerShell remote into the Exchange server, and you'll have access to this commandlet. What new transport rule does is it lets you make a new transport rule to designate how mail is handled, where it goes to, whatever you want. And this can be based on where it comes from, the sender it's going to, from address contains words, and subject or body contains words. So remember those 2 later on when we start talking about some of the other things we're going to do later. But one of the easiest things to do is once you're already in the network, you get access to the Exchange server. You want to make sure your later client sides will work, set up sort of a redundancy system. We can use this first command. So we're going to set a new transport rule. We're just going to name it set SCL. You could name it whatever you want to name it. So we're going to say anything coming from our attacker email address going to our default target, we're just going to set the SCL to -1. So anything that we send, no matter what it is, I can attach an executable to this file and send it to him, and it's going to go directly to his inbox. Even though I'm coming from malicious.net or wherever, it's going to send it right in. The other thing you can do that's fun and exciting is this bottom example. So we're going to set a new transport rule. We're going to call it BCC. We're going to say anything that is sent to our target person, we're just going to automatically blind carbon copy it to ourselves. So now every email that person gets is going to get exfilled in the background out to our email address, and we don't even have to do anything else. We just left these rules in place. All right. So now let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about backdoors. Every backdoor has one of two traits, right? It's either based on having a bind shell or a reverse shell. So they both have some flaws or things that can make them rather detectable. If you've got a permanently bound socket, that's horrible. No one should do that anymore. Hopefully, no penetration testers are still at that level that they're leaving a socket bound on the host. It's too easy to find, detect, and stop. Beacons, harder to find. That's definitely the preferred method. The issue that you might have there is even if you add some variance into your callbacks, eventually there's a good chance someone will have a fine-tuned IDS that's going to catch the traffic going on the wire. So best of both worlds gives you a host that has triggerable access. You have something that's not necessarily holding a socket open or listening, but is waiting for some form of a trigger. A prime example of this is like a port knock backdoor. You know, it's waiting for packets to hit, particular packets to hit 445, followed by 135, followed by 139, and if it gets them, it'll then have the payload call out. That's a triggerable backdoor. The benefit of triggerable backdoors is, again, you have no sockets bound whatsoever. There's no unnecessary network traffic, and you have 24/7 access. Outlook is an ideal triggering mechanism. If you think about it, what's it do? It sits there at all time and waits for traffic to come from wherever and auto forwards it to the host. So if you have something in Outlook that's listening for your trigger, as soon as the trigger hits, it can have your payload call out. So this portion I got inspired from Matt Nelson. So this is, he wrote a nice little proof of concept code that did this. Again, the link to it's going to be at the end of the presentation. This is only a triggering mechanism. You still have to have a persistence method. Like anything else, it is a PowerShell script. It has to be started by something. So you'll need some persistence method that's going to start it up, and you'll need to have some sort of payload that it triggers. For this simple proof of concept code, I just had it trigger a calculator because that seems to be the proof of concept go-to. If you can pop a calculator, you can pop a shell. So what the process is here, it's going to monitor the inbox for the trigger email. When the trigger's detected, it's going to start the payload and have something call back out. Matt Nelson's did this. The only things I did really that I tweaked on it a little bit is his deleted the email. I wanted to mark it as unread first, and then after I delete it, I also wanted to remove it from the deleted items folder so it's not still just sitting there. After that, it goes and sleeps for a designated interval and waits for another trigger packet. Everything's easy to see except for the cursor. There it is. Maybe. There we go. All right. All right. So for this trigger to work, we have to have a certain set of parameters that are defined. Obviously, you have to have the delay for how long you want it to sleep, the payload for what you want it to actually trigger. Again, in this case, I'm going to set it to a calculator. And then for this basic one, it's just looking for the sender's email address and then the subject line. So if it receives an email from the designated sending address and has the designated subject line, it's going to go into its other instructions and execute the payload. And then it'll sleep for a delay. If it gets any email that doesn't meet both those criteria, it's going to just go about its business, go through a sleep, and then come back to another cycle. There is also a switch if you want to monitor the junk folder instead of monitoring the inbox. That's fine and dandy too. People don't tend to pay as much attention to things that go to their junk folder. So maybe you wanted to put a transport rule in that set the SCL to 2 so that your email automatically went to junk, in which case you would set your folder you're monitoring to junk. So in this beginning section here, we're just defining which folder we're going to look at. The junk folder is folder number 23. The Outlook folder for the inbox is folder number 6. I don't know what all the other folder numbers are because they have a lot more folder numbers than they have actual folders. I guess they left some blank space in there in case they needed it for some future use. So then we've got this process that starts, and it's going to start the Outlook again and get that COM object. And then we're defining the folder to be whichever folder was specified in the earlier section. After that, it's going to define a variable called emails that is everything that's in that folder. And then for those emails, you didn't see that. For those emails, there's this little if statement that says if the sender address matches sent mail and if the subject matches the trigger subject, then it will go into this behavior. So the first thing it does is marks the unread to false. So that's going to make it not show up as a new email. It's going to make it sort of go away. Well, not go away, but it's going to mark it as read. After that, it's going to delete the email, so it gets moved to the deleted items folder and isn't sitting in the inbox anymore. And it's then going to set this variable of cleaned to false. So I used to have it just run through and automatically clean up after it ran through the trigger, but then I'm scanning two different folders, and it was doubling the resources necessary for the script. So now I just set a variable. Once it finds the trigger email and deletes it, sets the variable to false so that, excuse me, so that it knows it has to clean up. So then if cleaned is equal false, it will go through these cleanup steps. So the first thing it does is it grabs the deleted items folder, and then it defines the emails as everything that's in the deleted items folder, and then it looks for that same email, and when it finds it, it'll delete it from the deleted items, and then set the clean variable to true, so on the next cycle through, it won't attempt to clean up unless it receives another trigger. After that, it will start the sleep cycle, and I missed the part where it's calling the payload. Yep, it's right here. Okay. I knew I skipped it. So yeah, in the middle of that, right before it deleted the email, was start process payload, so whatever you had set as your process. Now, it wouldn't have to be an executable file. Instead of using start process here, you could use invoke expression and have it run a blob of a script instead. You could do whatever you really wanted it to be, whatever you wanted to set your payload to. So after it goes through that, and after it cleans up, it then just sleeps for a delay, and after it finishes its sleep, it goes back to monitoring the inbox again. Okay, so again, it's going to import the module, so it'll load up. I already have the email prepped, but I have it sitting in the junk folder. So I also have, if anyone's not familiar with PowerShell, all those lines that say write verbose that are in the script, those aren't going to do anything unless the script is started with the tac verbose switch, in which case it will give you extra information. So once I start the trigger mechanism is going, you're going to see it write the verbose line saying it's checking the inbox, email not found, and then sleeping and going through the cycle. And then as soon as I move the junk email folder from the junk folder to the inbox, you'll see it then trigger on the email and run through the rest of its steps and describe what it's doing as it goes. Video is moving, right? There we go. Okay, so there's the verbose lines. It's going through its sleep cycle. It's not finding an email, and it's moving on because there's no email that matches the trigger in the inbox. So now I'm going to go to the junk email. There is the email that matches the sender and the subject line. So it's in the folder. And you can see it just caught it, triggered, and started a calculator for us. Yay! All right. That's a fun, happy, active crowd. All right. So what's the one big problem with using email as a triggering mechanism? What happens when you get an email? You open it. How do you know that you have one? Yeah, it makes a pop-up, right? You get this little thing that looks a lot like that shows up. So what happens if you periodically get a pop-up and then you go to the folder and the email's gone? You might just scratch your head, think it's a glitch the first time, but about the third or fourth time you have this magical email that keeps popping up from the same sender and then magically disappearing. You might start to call your IT guy and be like, I think I'm owned. Or you're just not very cyber smart and you might just roll with it for the rest of your life. I don't know. But we're going to give people the benefit of the doubt and assume at some point they would make a jump. So the issue that you have there is, well, you still have to send the email for the trigger to work, but that deleting the email afterwards is going to sort of get you caught eventually. So I had a coworker who said, could you make that dynamic? And I thought, yeah, I bet you could. Thank you, Flip. And so I wrote a script to run more dynamically. So it doesn't have to come from a specific IP address or email address. It doesn't have to have a set trigger line. It can be any email that matches certain trigger criteria. So who here has a LinkedIn account? All right. So then having that LinkedIn account, who at least once every 2 weeks gets some spam email for some recruiter that scraped you off of your LinkedIn account? Yeah, it's annoying as hell. Do you even pay attention to them, or do you just leave them there and move them to your junk folder or delete them? Yeah, I don't even read mine most of the time anymore. I just delete them and move on. So that's the premise we're going to work with. We're going to filter on the body of the email instead of the sender address or the subject line. What we're going to do is we're going to have it look for a series of trigger words somewhere in the body of the email. So these would have to be 3 words that are common enough that it wouldn't seem really strange. You know, you can't have superfluous and supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and crap like that all together, because people are going to notice those words recurring over and over again. But on the other hand, it has to be specific enough that it's unlikely that a false trigger will get sent. We don't want an actual email from a real person to trigger our payload either. So we need to find the 3 trigger words in the email. Additionally, we have to find a single number. The email can't have more than one number in it. It has to have a single number that falls within the port range. So it has to be between 1 and 65,535. It also has to have a URL. That URL will be resolved to an IP address that will then be used for the callback. So this way you can send your email from any email address you want with any subject line. In the body, it just has to contain 3 words, a URL that can translate to the IP you want it to call back to, and a single number that is the port you want it to call back to. This way, when you put your payload on target, you can do a number of things. You can make if you're a big Metasploit fan and there's no antivirus in the network, you can make a default interpreter payload that just doesn't have a statically assigned callback, that has a dynamic one, so you can provide parameters and have that callback. Or you can just have a little blob of PowerShell that opens up a socket and calls back, whatever suits your fancy. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. Pay no mind to the turtle. He's not really there. All right. Okay, so the parameters that you would have to specify here, and I put a little bit of parameter control on here to make sure you give valid ones. So the first one is you need your trigger words, and I'm using validate count there to make sure you gave exactly 3 trigger words, because if you give less than that, the script will probably freak out and not be happy. We have a delay. Of course, this is still monitoring an inbox, so you have to set a delay. And when you're setting the delay, you need to find a balance. If you set it to too short, it's going to start really burning RAM because it's just constantly scanning the inbox over and over again. If you set it to a long delay, you're going to be waiting a while for it to scan, find your email, and trigger your callback. So if your email gets deleted before it finds it, you won't get your callback. So you need to find a middle ground there. Then you have to specify a payload, so what you want it to actually trigger. And again, it'll scan the inbox by default, or if you tell it to move to the junk folder, it'll go to the junk folder instead. The rest of this should look very familiar. It's selecting the junk folder or the inbox, or hooking Outlook the same way we did every time. And then for each email, if the body matches the trigger words 0, trigger words 1, and trigger words 2, because our trigger words are just saved as a string array. So as long as it finds all 3 of them, it will then grab the body of the email, and it's going to load it up in a variable. And then we have 2 other variables I've defined here. One is the regex for a URL, and another is the regex for every possible port range. I really suck at regex, so I need to thank my coworkers again for writing my regex for me. It is not my forte at all. That was Jared. After that, for each section in the, so the formatted is just the body of the email split on every space. So it's grabbing each word or each section between spaces and calling it a section. And it's then checking each one of those, and if it matches the URL regex, it's going to grab it and acknowledge that that is what it's going to have to use as its callback address. If it matches the port regex, it's going to set that as the port. So down here, we're going to set lookup to use the .NET Accelerator system.net.dns to get the host entry for that URL. And we've just got a catch statement there for if it goes foobar on us. And then we're doing the net IP address for the IP equals lookup for that address. And then set the address to a string. So I don't have an actual payload for the demo here. Instead, I'm having it resolve our corporate email for the IP address. And then it's just going to pop a text document that says the IP address I would call back to is this IP. The port I would call back to is X port. Now, come back. All right. I'm doing good for time. All right. So again, we're going to import the module first. We're setting it to go in the trigger words. I think what I picked were LinkedIn, independent, and cyber attack security. Figured those are all words that won't pop as like nasty buzzwords, but they're also things that are unlikely to show up in an email by themselves because who hyphenates cybersecurity or even uses the term as much anymore. So this is my email. I saw your profile on LinkedIn. I'm an independent contractor, yada, yada, yada. I do cybersecurity. You can reach me at chirontech.com. And then I found a street address is a great place to squeeze in a port number because street addresses do not generally have more than 5 digits to them, and ports also do not have more than 5 digits to them. So it's a great place to put your port number. So it's looking for the email, it's running, it's not finding any because again, it's in the junk email folder right now and not in the folder that it's monitoring. So it's just going to go through and sleep and try to find things because nothing in the inbox matches. So we're going to take our junk email and we are going to move it to our inbox. And it should find it in just a second. So it said, hey, I found Chiron Tech, and it popped open a notepad, so it will call back to that IP address on port 2700, and I think I have an NS lookup for our corporate IP address going that'll show that the port, or rather the IP address, is the same. So that way it can call back to whatever you want, and you don't have to use the same callback IPs or emails each time you set things up. Let me minimize that too. So that's awesome. Triggering backdoors is great. Anyone tell me what is better than triggering a backdoor? What if you don't even have to get on the box to begin with? I mean, at the end of the day, automation makes your life so much easier. So what if you could have something that monitors Outlook, and instead of having a callback that's going to trigger a payload and call you back, what if the task you need to do is a smaller, easier one? Say it is that CEO, and you know everything of value is on his desktop. So maybe you just want to get the contents of that desktop and pull it back on a recurring basis. Well, we can use Outlook to get our information for us and be our command and control mechanism for our automation script without having to get a shell on the target. I mean, if you think about it, it's designed to receive emails. It'll then take the instructions we give us, do our collection, attach it to another email, and exfil the information right back out to us using the same email system. Okay, the problem with this is you can't just send a PS1 script to Outlook. It is not going to work. Anything with the PS1 extension is instantly recognized as executable code, and at a minimum, it's going to go to the junk folder and have the code disabled. Depending on how the exchange rules are set up, it can quarantine or reject your email. So that leaves us two possible options. We could either put our script literally in the body of the email, or we can just attach it as a .txt file. Outlook and Exchange consider text files to be completely harmless and benign. They don't even monitor for them. They just let them right through. So you could have done either method. I opted to just go for the attachment. So I'm just going to put the commands I want into a text file and attach them to the email. Okay, so it's a fairly simple process. This could be streamlined, and I plan to streamline it a little more in a later evolution of this, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. So it's going to monitor the inbox or junk folder, whatever you tell it. Once it detects the email, it's going to, and again, this is dynamic, so it's looking for 3 trigger words in the email body. And then once it finds it, it's going to take the attachment, and it's going to save the attachment to disk in the temp folder. Once it saves it, it's going to grab its contents, save them as a variable, and then delete that temporary file. It's going to take that variable, which contains your script. It's going to execute whatever instructions were inside of it, and after it executes, it's going to write the results out to another temporary file on the disk, which it will then attach as an attachment to an email that will go back to whatever email address sent the script in the first place. Afterwards, it'll go through the standard cleanup procedures. It'll blow away that second temp file. It will delete both the trigger and exfil emails from the inbox and the send items folder, and then it'll clean up the deleted items folder. How am I doing on time? I need to go a little faster. Okay. So it functions in a similar manner to the others. So I'm just going to, all it needs for parameters is the delay and the trigger words. That's setting the folder again. I'm going to skip down to the part that is new. So for a place to save to disk, I just went ahead and saved to the temp folder. And for the names for the temporary files, I went with ~df some numbers because that's always there anyways. It's how Windows saves temp files there to begin with. So we'll just throw a couple extras in there. They're not going to be there long enough for anyone to notice. And no AV is going to be looking for malicious TXT files because they're non-executable. So it's going to save it to disk. Afterwards, it's going to create a new Outlook item. We're just setting a subject, the body, redefining the to address as the attacker email from the trigger email, and attaching the text file and then sending it. Afterwards, it goes through cleanup, which basically matches all the others. On this last video, you're going to notice things are a little bit different. There's going to be some pop-ups, and I will explain what the pop-ups are afterwards. All right. So there are going to be 2 pop-ups. One is going to be when we start trying to grab emails from the inbox. You're going to see a pop-up from Outlook saying, hey, somebody's doing something bad. Do you want to let them do this? Also, when we try to send an email, it's going to make another pop-up that says, hey, somebody's doing something bad. Are you sure you want to let them do this? So I'll get into how we get around those later. Well, momentarily, because I'm running out of time. Okay. So this one has, I made a much simpler email, but it's got the 3 trigger words, and it has a text document in it. and the text document has one command, which is just get process. So all it's going to do is grab a process list and send the email back out. In the script, I commented out the part where it cleans up the emails because I need to have the sent email there to show that it actually worked. If it deleted it, I'd just be like, it did it. I promise. So it's going to run through. I have it loaded up with the 3 trigger words, kitty, dog, and cheeky. It's searching, and when I move the email to the inbox, it should now, momentarily, there's the pop-up. It says, hey, somebody just tried to grab this email and do something. Are you sure you want to allow this? So I said, yes, allow it. It's then going to run the command, and there's another one that says, hey, a program's trying to send an email in your name. Are you sure you want to allow this? I went ahead and said yes, so it's sent. So it sent the item. The verbose says that it was cleaning up, but it didn't actually clean up. And if we look at the sent items folder, there will be an email in there to our attacker with an attachment that should have the process list. Ta-da! All right. So I think it's kind of minimize. I think it's kind of shady to give a talk talking about nasty stuff you can do without giving a quick preview of how you can actually do some defense to this. So how can you stop these things from happening? How can you protect yourself? Oh, I skipped a slide. This is just what I'd like to do in the future. Obviously, I'd want to add encryption, but I'm smart enough about encryption to know that I'm not smart enough to roll my own, so I would have someone else roll my crypto for me. And I would like to merge it all into one tool so you could sort of do it as an all-in-one and not have 4 separate scripts. So how do you protect yourself? For starters, you can go ahead and get rid of your AV product. This is a horrible idea to do in general, but the reason we didn't get pop-ups in the first 3 videos and we did in the 4th, the 4th one did not have an antivirus product. Yeah, did not have an antivirus product on it. So once an antivirus product registers, Outlook says, oh, there's an AV. I don't have to protect myself anymore. The AV product is going to do it for me. So those pop-ups that you saw in the 4th video was Outlook defending itself. But if you have an AV product, thank you, Avast, you did a great job. Outlook assumes that everything's fine and that the AV product will take care of it. So it didn't. So I guess you just need to have a better antivirus product than Avast free version. Maybe Avast paid version will check email and monitor. But it does make Outlook disable its own defenses. Other things you can do. I mean, stopping it from happening is difficult unless, you're monitoring your Exchange server. But I mean, event logs. Assume breach and just monitor your event logs. Starting with kernel 6.1, so Windows, if you have that particular hotfix attached, in addition to auditing process creation, you can also include the command line in the event log. So if you have the command line, it's going to have, when the PowerShell process starts, it's going to have that it's starting a script and where it's loading that script from. Look at that. PowerShell logging. If you're on a system that has PowerShell, you have a PowerShell log. Turn it on and set the settings. If you have PowerShell version 4 or newer, there's a feature called PowerShell transcription. So you can just type start transcript, and it will record every command and everything that those commands return that happens in a PowerShell session. There's also a setting you can turn on that has mandatory PowerShell transcription. So anytime that PowerShell pops on the host, it's going to run, and everything that got typed and written gets written to disk, but it doesn't alert the user that it's doing it. The user in this case being the attacker. These are my shout-outs. So for the scraping Outlook, I got the idea from Ed Wilson's thing on exporting your Outlook calendar. And for the triggers, I got the initial idea from, again, Matt Nelson's blog. It is very good. I would recommend you read it if you have copious spare time. If you want any of these code samples, they are all up on GitHub. Feel free to grab them, modify them, do what suits your fancy. Just please, if you use them irresponsibly, you didn't get them from me. And that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
are aware that you can do .visible after Outlook when you create the COM object to make it disappear. So if the user hadn't actually loaded it already, you could load it, make it disappear, or not be visible for more than half a second or so, and then do everything you need to do. So it could be done before hours or after hours when the users are gone.
No, I did not actually know that. Oh, I learned something today. This is a really good talk. I learned something. Thank you. I'll have to talk to you afterwards. Any other questions? Bueller? Yes.
You mentioned earlier about encryption, so something separate from that, would you be able to use steganography and just say encrypt, hide your PowerShell script inside of it, and then have it separate from that?
So you want to, for which aspect? So you want to store the scripts that I had that are running, or the one for the command and control that it runs?
When you're sending the user a PowerShell script inside that text file,
Okay.
it's kind of obvious that they can open it up and see it, even if it's encrypted. So if you were to hide that inside an image using steganography, would that be a successful way of keeping it low-key?
You could hide it in an image. I do not have a strong background in Stego. Theoretically, yeah, you probably just made your script a lot longer, but I don't see a reason why you wouldn't be able to. Anybody else? Yes. Yes. So the execution policy, it's a good thing. Microsoft is very careful to call that a safety feature, not a security feature. So the difference would be your seatbelt is a safety feature. It will not stop you from running your car into a tree. The execution policy is a good catch, but there's so many ways to bypass that I mean, it's ridiculous. There's web pages called 15 ways to bypass the script execution policy in PowerShell. It's pretty much child's play to step around it.
Incorporate one of those methods in just in case someone has a set manner that you're going to throw the wire.
Oh yeah, if I was going to deploy it, whatever actually started up the script, I would run that with a bypass to get past the execution policy. Yep. All right, I am just about out of time.